One night in the fall of 1965, the most dangerous man in country music walked onto the most sacred stage in country music, and he asked for more light. The stage was the Grand Ole Opry inside the old Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. They call that building the Mother Church of Country Music, and they are not joking. It used to be an actual church. Hank Williams stood on that stage. Patsy Cline stood on that stage. If country music has a holy place, this is it. And on this night, Johnny Cash is standing on it, and something is wrong. He is rail thin. His eyes are glass. He has been awake, by some accounts, for days. Before the show, he asks for the stage lights to be turned up. The answer is no. So in the middle of his set, in front of a full house, Johnny Cash takes the microphone stand, drags it across the row of footlights at the edge of the stage, and smashes every single bulb in the line. Glass sprays into the front rows. The Mother Church goes silent. And when he comes off that stage, the Opry tells him, in so many words, "You are finished here. Do not come back." The biggest star in the building had just been thrown out of the church. And here is the part that should have been the ending. That same rainy night, the story goes, Johnny Cash gets behind the wheel of a brand new Cadillac that belonged to June Carter, drives it into a Nashville downpour, and wraps it around a utility pole. Broken nose, broken teeth. His manager quietly cleans up the mess, again. Banned from the Opry, bleeding in a wrecked car that was not his. 90 minutes of fame left, the way anyone in Nashville would have bet that night. So the question of tonight's story is this: how does that man, the one lying in the glass in the rain, become the biggest-selling recording artist on planet Earth just 4 years later? Bigger that year than the Beatles. The answer runs through a jail cell in El Paso, a burned mountain full of dead condors, and a cave in Tennessee that he crawled into with no plan of ever crawling out. Welcome back to Country Mysteries. I'm Roman. And tonight, we finally walk into the building we have been circling this entire series, the Grand Ole Opry, on the arm of the man it threw out, Johnny Cash, the man in black. Last week, I promised you smashed footlights and a 7-year fall. I keep my promises. Grab a seat. This one starts at the bottom and goes lower. To understand the crash, you have to understand the engine. And the engine, as always on this show, was built in a cotton field. Dyess, Arkansas, the Great Depression. A government resettlement colony where the Cash family works 20 acres of bottomland, and a boy named J.R. drags a cotton sack down the rows and sings gospel songs at the top of his lungs to get through the day. If that opening sounds familiar, it should. Hank Williams, Johnny Horton, Jim Reeves. Episode after episode, this show keeps starting in the same dirt. But the Cash childhood carries one extra scar. In 1944, his older brother Jack, the good son, the one who was going to be a preacher, is pulled onto a spinning table saw at the school workshop and fatally injured. He is 14. Johnny is 12. Their father, by some family accounts, tells Johnny it should have been him. Carry that sentence with you tonight, because Johnny Cash carried it for the rest of his life. Fast forward. Air Force radio operator. Memphis, 1955. Sun Records, the same tiny label that found Elvis. I Walk the Line goes to #1 in 1956, and by 1963, with a song called Ring of Fire, written for him by a married woman named June Carter, who was terrified of what she felt for him. Johnny Cash is one of the biggest acts in American music. He is also, by 1963, a full-time amphetamine user. The pills started on tour, the way they always did back then. Little white ones to drive all night, little colored ones to sleep. Elvis took them. Half of Nashville took them. But Johnny Cash did not take pills the way other people took pills. He took them the way a man pours gasoline on a fire he secretly wants to see burn the whole field. Which brings us to 1965, and I want you to look at this one year, because I have covered a lot of bad years on this channel, and I have never seen anything quite like Johnny Cash's 1965. May 1965, Starkville, Mississippi. Cash finishes a college show, goes wandering the streets at 2 in the morning, and gets arrested on a stranger's lawn. The official story, the one he told from stages for years, they locked him up for picking flowers. He got a song out of it, Starkville City Jail. The town got a festival out of it, decades later, complete with a symbolic pardon. Everybody laughed. Nobody asked why a millionaire was crawling through flower beds at 2 a.m. June 1965. California. His camper truck, which he named Jesse James, breaks down in Los Padres National Forest, and either a defective exhaust or an unattended campfire, depending on whose story you believe, sets the mountainside alight. 508 acres burn, and not just any acres. This was the nesting ground of the California condor, one of the rarest birds on the planet. Reports counted 53 condors before the fire and single digits after. The federal government sued Johnny Cash for $125,000, and when the lawyers asked him, under oath, how he felt about the birds, the biggest star in country music looked at them and said, and this is quoted in the court record of legend, "I don't give a damn about your yellow buzzards." He settled for $82,000. He is still, to this day, remembered as the man the United States government successfully sued over a forest fire. October 1965, El Paso, Texas. Cash takes a cab across the border to Juarez, Mexico, and buys hundreds of amphetamines and tranquilizers. He hides them inside a sock, stuffs the sock in his luggage, and walks straight into a customs check at the airport. Federal agents pull out enough pills to stock a small pharmacy. Johnny Cash spends the night in an El Paso jail cell, and the next morning the cameras are waiting. That photograph, the man in black in handcuffs, runs in papers across America. He eventually pleads guilty, pays a $1,000 fine, takes a suspended sentence, and walks away. And somewhere in the middle of all this, that fall, comes the Opry night. The footlights, the glass, the band, the Cadillac, and the pole. 1 year. A jail cell in Mississippi, a dead mountain in California, a federal drug arrest in Texas, a ban from the holiest stage in the genre, and a wrecked car belonging to the woman he loved. That is not a rough patch. That is a man dismantling his own life in public, piece by piece, and daring somebody to stop him. Nobody stopped him. It got worse. By 1966, his first marriage was over. Vivian had filed, citing the drugs, the absences, the chaos. By 1967, the man who once packed every hall in America was missing shows by the dozen or showing up as a ghost. Johnny Cash stands 6'2". By the worst of it, friends put his weight around 140 pounds. His voice, that voice, was cracking on stage. Promoters stopped calling. The hits dried up. June Carter was flushing his pills down hotel toilets, and he was buying more in the next town. And they both knew exactly how this movie ends, because they had both watched Hank Williams die at 29. And here is the irony, and regular viewers of this show know I collect ironies. The song that made him a superstar, Ring of Fire, was June Carter's warning. She wrote it about him, about the terror of loving a man who was already burning. He recorded her warning, sold 1 million copies of it, and then spent the next 4 years proving her right. Which brings us to October 1967, and the strangest chapter in this entire story. The Cave. Nickajack Cave, Marion County, Tennessee, on the Tennessee River near Chattanooga. A limestone mouth 140 feet wide. Civil War soldiers mined it. Bats own it. And one autumn day in 1967, Johnny Cash drove there alone, hours from Nashville, with a flashlight and no rope, no food, no plan to return. He said it plainly in his autobiography. He wanted to disappear. He crawled into that cave to die. He crawled for hours, deeper and deeper, until the batteries in the flashlight gave out. And then he lay down on the rock in a darkness so total it makes no difference whether your eyes are open or closed. And he waited for the end. And then, by his own account, something happened in that darkness. Here is how he described it in his own words. I became conscious of a very clear, simple idea. I was not in charge of my destiny. I was not in charge of my own death. He said a feeling of peace came over him that he could not explain. Hundreds of pills deep, days without sleep, and suddenly stone sober in his mind. He got up. He had no idea which way was out. He crawled in whatever direction his hands found, and then he felt it. A breath of wind on his back. Moving air. He turned and followed that wind through the black until he saw a gray smudge of light, and he came out of Nickajack Cave into the daylight. And in his telling, June Carter and her mother, Maybelle, were waiting near the entrance with a basket of food. They had sensed something was wrong and come looking. You can believe that detail or not. Hold that thought, because we are coming back to it at the verdict. What is documented is this. That autumn, Johnny Cash went home to his lake house in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and with June, her parents, and a doctor named Nat Winston, a former state commissioner of mental health, he locked himself in and sweated the pills out of his body. Friends stood shifts. The dealers stopped getting calls. It was brutal. It was not instant. And by the end of 1967, for the first time in 7 years, Johnny Cash was clean. Now, a clean Johnny Cash is a nice story for his family. What happened next is why we are here tonight. Because next comes the single greatest comeback in the history of American music, and it starts in a prison cafeteria. January 13th, 1968, Folsom State Prison, California. Cash had been singing about that prison since 1955, a song he wrote after watching a movie about it in the Air Force, one line of which, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die," had convinced half of America he was an ex-convict. He had been begging Columbia Records for years, "Let me record an album inside a real prison." The executives thought it was career suicide. The old regime said no. A new producer, Bob Johnston, the man behind Dylan, said yes. So the band man, the punchline, the walking obituary, walks into a cafeteria full of 2,000 convicted felons, looks out at the one audience in America whose reputation is worse than his, and says 4 words, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." The recording of what followed became At Folsom Prison. It went to #1 on the country album chart. It crossed to number 13 on the pop chart and squatted on the charts for 124 weeks, 2.5 years. The live Folsom Prison Blues hit #1 on the country singles chart that July and took home a Grammy. The album has since gone triple platinum, 3.4 million copies in America alone. The genre that had thrown him out of its church watched him build a bigger church in a prison cafeteria. And 1 month after Folsom, on a stage in London, Ontario, in front of 5,000 people, Johnny Cash stopped the show, turned to June Carter, and asked her to marry him. Live. No warning. She had turned him down for years, waiting on the pills. She looked at the clean man in front of her and said yes. They were married on March the 1st, 1968, and stayed married until the day she died. But 1969 is where this story goes from redemption to something almost unbelievable. February 1969. He does it again. At San Quentin, recorded behind the walls of California's most feared prison. That album does not stop at the country chart. It goes to #1 on the Billboard 200, the main pop chart, every genre, everybody. It carries a novelty song recorded in one take, A Boy Named Sue, to the top of the charts. And by the end of 1969, the industry tallies were saying something nobody could quite process. Johnny Cash had moved roughly 6.5 million albums in a single year, outselling the biggest band on the planet, the Beatles, at the absolute peak of their powers. Think about the 2 photographs, 4 years apart. October 1965, handcuffed in El Paso, banned in Nashville, 140 pounds. 1969, the best-selling recording artist on earth. And then came the moment that closes tonight's circle. In 1969, the ABC television network offered Johnny Cash his own national primetime show and asked him where he wanted to film it. He could have said Hollywood. He could have said New York. Johnny Cash said, "The Ryman Auditorium, Nashville, Tennessee. The Mother Church." The building whose stage he had smashed, the institution that had shown him the door. The ban had quietly ended. The Opry had let him back by 1968, and now, 4 years after the Footlights, the Johnny Cash Show went out to all of America from that exact stage, 58 episodes, top 20 in the ratings, with the man in black standing in a blaze of television lights on the very boards he once left covered in broken glass. His first ever guests on that stage, Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell. The outlaw did not just come back to the church, he turned it into his living room. So let's open the file one last time and lay out what we actually know. On the record, the fall was real. Starkville, the fire, the condors, El Paso, the footlights, the ban. All documented, court records, arrest records, Opry history. The collapse was real. The divorce, the missed shows, the 140-pound frame, the 7 years of pills. The cave is his story. Nickajack is real. His visit is in his autobiography, and the piece he described is either a miracle or a hallucination, depending on which door you are about to pick. And the comeback is beyond dispute. Folsom, San Quentin, the marriage, the Beatles beaten, the Ryman reclaimed. No artist before or since has fallen that far in public and climbed back that high, that fast. Now comes your part. 3 doors, as always. Door number 1, the miracle. A dying man crawls into the earth to end it, meets something in the dark that he calls God, and walks out changed. Everything after Nickajack, Folsom, June, the Ryman, flows from one moment of grace in a Tennessee cave. That is the door Johnny Cash himself walked through, and he never once wavered on it. Door number 2, the woman. No cave saves an addict. People save addicts when they stay. June Carter flushed the pills, turned down the proposals until he was clean, stood guard at Hendersonville with her whole family, and then stood on every stage he played for the next 35 years. Take June out of this story, and Johnny Cash is a Hank Williams ending with a longer first act. And door number 3, the showman. The skeptic's door. Biographers have noted the timeline of the cave story as murky, that the river was rising into Nickajack behind a new dam around that very period, and that Cash, the greatest myth builder American music ever produced, told the story of his own life the way he sang for maximum impact. Maybe the cave grew in the telling. Maybe the man who invented an outlaw who never did prison time also authored his own resurrection because he understood better than anyone. America forgives a sinner, but it worships a redeemed one. Which door do you walk through? The miracle, the woman, or the showman? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, one last thing. Rewind this story to New Year's Day, 1959, San Quentin Prison. Johnny Cash, years before the fall, plays one of his very first prison shows. And sitting in that sea of denim, serving 15 years for a burglary he was too drunk to pull off properly, is a 20-year-old inmate from Bakersfield, California. That kid watches the man in black own 2,000 hardened men with nothing but a guitar and decides, right there, what he is going to do with his life. His name was Merle Haggard. And what he survived before that night, the freight trains, the escapes, the death row neighbor, is a story so dark that next week, Country Mysteries goes back inside San Quentin to tell it. That's next week on Country Mysteries. If tonight's story stayed with you, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments where you were the first time you heard that voice say, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." Until next week, keep the volume up and the headlights on. This is Country Mysteries. Good night.